Malika.
Hello, Cassandra. All right, so I'll start. Um, in an article for the Christian Century, Yolanda Pierce, Dean at Howard University School of Divinity, I had to bring in Howard somehow,
I like that.
writes that calling upon the ancestors is about memory, remembering how I am connected to a web of humanity that does not end when our bodies return to dust. I want to excavate those ancestral memories, to listen as voices speak to my heart across time and distance, to pay attention to the stories of people whose voices were silenced when they were alive. I feel the presence of these ancestors encouraging me to speak truth in places and spaces they were never allowed to enter. I feel like this is We Are Bridges
It's
in a
so
nutshell.
beautiful.
Yes. So We Are Bridges is a hybrid text, part memoir, part fictional imagining, part Black history, part Black future. It's a book that has been scratching at your feet for at least 3 decades. I didn't keep counting after 3 decades. But I want the emerging authors who are listening in this room or on Zoom to know that the process of bringing a work to life often requires that the writer lives life. So can you talk about when you first began to listen as ancestral voices spoke to your heart and how those voices became clearer as you moved into maturity?
That's beautiful. First, Malika, just thank you so much for coming up from Amsterdam to be with us in conversation. I'm so honored and just so happy to see you, first of all. She used to live about 5 minutes away from me in Los Angeles, and it's so wonderful to reunite in Europe. And thank you to the library, to the audience here and online. Thank you, Patrick. My heart is so moved by our long friendship and by your support. Thank you. So your question is beautiful. I love that quote so much. I just feel it all. It gave me chills. I feel it to like, my bone and the soul. And I think I have to start with my ancestors before they were ancestors. So as a little girl, I'm the oldest of five, but so for some reason I was kind of like an alien with the kids who were my age. I always felt like an outsider. And so either I was alone reading or looking up at the clouds and daydreaming or writing, um, just always very imaginative. Well, all the kids were learning how to do cartwheels, which I never mastered. And I think, my mom got divorced when I was 5. We moved back in with her parents. And her parents were in their late 70s by the time we moved back in with them. And for some reason, I felt more comfortable hanging around my elders than I did my peers. And so I think that listening started then when I was a little girl, even though I wasn't necessarily trying to, tell their story. I was writing, but I wasn't thinking that that was a story that I needed to tell. But I was always listening to their conversations. My grandmother was such a strong figure in that community in Louisiana that she had this huge family. So family members were coming in all the time. I talk about how our front door was a revolving door. It was never locked. People would just come on the porch and let you know that they were about to come in by saying, yoo-hoo. And so they were coming either for sugar or flour or whatever she had, cornmeal, but also really just the conversation. She wasn't a big talker. She was the listener herself. So they would talk and they would pour out whatever it was that they needed to say, heartache, their successes, whatever it was. And she would just listen, offer prayer, offer comfort. And I just loved listening to her. And their stories. My grandfather, her husband, often talked about the past. He often lamented about, the trials and tribulations of the past. And so as I was playing with my dolls or writing, I guess I was just taking all of that in and didn't know. And it just started flowering later, probably first when I went away for college. It's something about, I think we talked about this last night, there's something about being away from whatever environment you're in because you're so steeped in it while you're in it. And when you're away, you're able to look back at it with distance and with depth. So I think that's when my first little story that I wrote about the family was probably my sophomore year of college. Yeah.
So parents, take note, if you have a child who's not playing with other children, but is off reading somewhere, they might be a guest at the American Library in Paris in the future.
They're definitely a writer or an artist or something like that.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. Okay, so I am jealous because you are a disciplined early riser. Yeah, you're all bragging about how you wake up at 4 o'clock. So can you talk about the process and your writing rituals? You have a very beautiful way of entering into the practice of writing.
Don't be jealous because I can't stay up late at night. So, while you're watching great movies, doing whatever, I'm like knocked out and I can fall asleep anywhere on the floor, anywhere. So I always thought that I developed this habit of getting up at 4:30 in the morning because I was trying to finish this book. But I was talking to my mom a couple of months ago and she's like, no, as a kid, you were always the earliest to wake up. And I have to maybe attribute that to my grandmother too, because my grandmother had all of these responsibilities, but I would hear her at 2:33 in the morning with the old floorboards creaking because she was up doing her work. Like she spent all day serving, cooking, serving her husband, serving her children, grown children. But she spent that time early in the morning doing her quilting, working on little projects that she wanted to work on. And so maybe I internalized that. So especially once I became a mother, getting up at 4 and 4:30 was a necessity because, and that's really not a lot of time because, my son would have to get up and get ready for school. I'd have to get up and get ready for work. I've always worked full time while writing. And so it was just a necessity. And I fell in love with that dark hour of the morning where everyone is still asleep. The neighborhood, most of it is still asleep. There's something very mysterious about it. So I would go into my writing room. And right now I'm saying using the past tense because I'm trying to get back to that point. Since the book came out, I've been so busy promoting it and haven't been able to, get back to my writing practice. But I go into the writing room, I turn on a little space heater, even if it's not cold outside, because there's something about that warmth. And I even said that I create a womb environment, a space that feels warm and safe. I light candles, I light incense, I pray, I meditate.
What kind of incense?
Oh yeah, amber, something with amber tones or amber notes or vanilla, tobacco, things that just make me think of that earthiness and woods and my ancestors.
Beautiful. So it's a self-care practice as well as a creative practice.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Oh, okay. Also last night, you told me a bit more about your writing process, that you don't think about genre or label your work while it's coming to be, but instead you allow the work to tell you what it is. Why is that freedom important?
Because we already have so much that that we're fighting against as we try to bring ourselves to the page. And even though I started really seriously working on this book when I was in my MFA program at Antioch University, Los Angeles, and I chose the creative nonfiction genre. There was fiction and there was poetry. I chose that because I'd been a journalist and I thought that made more sense, and that the book that I was going to write was probably going to be in that under that umbrella of creative nonfiction. But as I started writing it, initially, what was coming to me was a story, coming up with a story for my ancestor, Bert Bridges, who's a main character in the book, my great-grandfather who was lynched. And I didn't have much information. There were no records and I kept hitting this brick wall. And so I knew that I was going to have to, or at least it was a writerly choice, fictionalize a story for him, because I didn't want to just say that my great-grandfather was lynched and I wanted to put flesh and bone, flesh on the bones of the story that I knew. I wanted to hear him speak, even though I'd never heard him speak. I remembered the love of his life very well. My great grandmother, I was 11 when she died, and I ate her food, I touched her skin. And so in that way, he was real for me because I touched her and known her. And that was the man that she loved, even until her deathbed, despite the fact that she had married someone else. She, in her 90s, was talking and crying about Bert Bridges. And so initially I started writing it as a fiction, about him. And then as I continued to do that, I would get stuck and I couldn't separate myself from this story of my ancestors. So it felt very personal. So then I would write, first person pieces. And I just didn't know, I had all these disparate pieces and I didn't know how it was going to weave together until I started workshopping, and writers who are amazing started showing me how I could connect the fictionalized imagined story of my ancestors with my personal, story. So at some point I just said, I don't know what it's called. I'm just going to do away with genre. I don't know if I can get away with doing this. But when I gave myself that permission to just write it as it came out, that's when it started flowing more.
I'm glad you did. And sitting here, I'm remembering that the fictionalized parts of the story are reminiscent to me of my favorite short story by Zora Neale Hurston, another daughter of the American South. And it's The Gilded Six Bits, the play between the couples. You have this horror story where there is a lynching, but the intimacy and the play and the conversations are so rich in the text. So that's an assignment. Read We Are Bridges and also read The Gilded Six Bits. All right. So you're the most recent awardee of the Louise Merriweather First Book Prize, sponsored by the Feminist Press and Teo Literary Magazine. Yeah. So how did you come to learn about the award, and what did you submit for consideration? Because you work with them to edit. So what was the submission and how did you learn about it?
Yeah, great question. I was revising yet again. I love revising and I can get stuck there. And I was revising, I felt really I felt like the book was really shaping up nicely. And this was in 2019. And I just promised myself that I would start sending it out. I didn't have time to really do the agent search. So I hadn't started, looking for agents, not seriously. But I came across a couple of book contests, first book prizes. And I don't remember where I first saw, there were two that I applied to that year, AWP First Book Prize and the Feminist Press First Book Prize. And I ended up getting nominated first for the Louise Merriweather First Book Prize in September. And then I found out in December, the publisher called me and said that I was the winner. But it might have been through a Women Who Submit, which is a nonprofit organization based in Los Angeles, but really now all over the world, which encourages women and non-binary writers to submit our work, and also to not be afraid to submit our work to top-tier journals. So it might have been through a portal on Women Who Submit, it might have been through something else, but I saw it. I saw that the deadline was like the next day. And I got together a cover letter, and I think the deadline was for midnight, and I submitted probably around 11:58 p.m. and forgot about it and started, because if I do submit something for me, I just have to put it out of my mind and just keep working, keep writing and revising. So I forgot about it and kept working. I heard back from the other contest as well that they really loved the project, and I was able to, do some more revisions based on that feedback. And so by the time I got the email from Feminist Press, I was really shocked and surprised and had done even more revisions. And I told the publisher, I've been revising since I turned in that manuscript. It was an earlier draft of this same book. And she said, oh, how much have you revised? Because we really loved it. But they were very gracious and gave me a few months to finish the revisions that I was working on. I sent those to them in March, and then we sort of did some back and forth, over those next several months on that final manuscript.
So first of all, I'm inspired. That's incredible for all the last minute people who submit. You can be winners.
I admire very organized people. Don't do it my way.
So talk about that editing process, because I remember when the book before publication, you talked a lot about the former, is it Jamia Wilson?
Mhm.
Yeah, the former executive director of the Feminist Press. And you talked a little bit about the editing process. How was that for you? Because you also work as an editor. So for a story that is so deeply personal and even at times painful, how do you approach, I guess, what are some of the challenges of listening to an editor's feedback, working with an editor, and in what ways do you grow with the story during that process?
Yeah, that's a really great question. I love the editing process. I started off, as a newspaper journalist, even though I wanted to write books, that was my sort of secondary backup safe career. And so in my actually before my first job, I was the editor in chief of my college campus newspaper. And so I had been working with freelance writers, since then, and editors and photojournalists. And then I did my internship at the local newspaper. And then when I was a reporter, I would work on deadline, sometimes 4 and 5 stories a day with editors. And so it was a process that was just part of my system, in terms of, this is what I've written, but it's a draft. And a draft is something that's livable and breathable. And editors are our friends. And editors are people that we need to, listen to. They're able to see our stories in ways that we often can't. That's not to say that the editor is always right about every single suggestion that they make. Absolutely not. But it's just an art form that I absolutely admire and value and appreciate. And I think, even though this is a personal story, I was able to separate myself. By the time I write it and put it out there, whether it's at a reading or sending it off, I've separated myself in some way from the character that I've created on the page, even though those characters are my family and myself. There's a certain separation, and maybe journalism gave me that ability or that skill to distance in that way. And I think, over the years, I've been publishing little pieces of this story, reading, at readings, little pieces of the story. And I had dealt with a lot of the sort of emotional part of telling such an emotional story, that by the time I turned the manuscript in as a whole thing, I was ready to let it go. I was ready to release it. And I have to say that editors at the Feminist Press, they're so nurturing. There was nothing scary about it, because they were very open and nurturing. We did a lot of back and forth. All their marginalia I've kept, because I just feel like that's part of the archive. And, I learned so much. I've had lots of pieces and stories published, but never a whole book. And that's a whole other animal. And I learned so much from that process. And I just think I have a special drawer with all of our correspondences. Because I know I'm gonna be able to use that when I go into the next project. Maybe I can help other writers, and that can be examples when I talk to I'm teaching some workshops coming up, so I absolutely loved it.
I want to go to that workshop. Look at your neighbor and say the editor is your friend. Uh, ah. You wrote in the book that your mother was confused when you announced that you would major in journalism in college. And she was confused because she didn't see you as a person who likes to talk to other people. But here we are talking, and you've been interviewed a lot since the publication of your book. Can you offer public speaking tips for the more introverted aspiring writer?
Yeah, it's hilarious. I mean, even as late as 2019, I was just deathly afraid of public speaking. I was going to be on a show called Expressing Motherhood, which is a live storytelling show. Hi, Daphne. A live storytelling show. And, it's one thing to read in front of a lot of writers that but this was going to be an audience of all kinds of people, not just writers. And it was more of a stage at the lights, and a whole production. So I was physically sick, just thinking about it. But I got through. I got through the show, and it was such and there were other writers and performers as well. And it was such a popular show that they did another one. We came back. And so I think, just pushing yourself to first just go through it and realizing afterwards, I'm still alive. I survived that is really affirming. And then my husband said, maybe stop saying that you're afraid of public speaking. Because I think the more you say it, the more you just integrate it into your belief system. And so I started writing in my journal. I love public speaking. I embrace public speaking.
Affirmations.
I put little stickies on my board, on the wall. And I think those things, they were kind of laughable, but I think those things helped me just kind of psychologically and emotionally. And then in terms of practically listening, there's so much out there, so many great talks on YouTube. Whatever you listen to, on podcasts, just listening to people in conversation, listening to writers and artists in conversation, and just bring, when you have something, just bring your real self to that event. I think those are some practical tips that I would give.
Got it. So affirmations, breathing. Do you? Because I think
breathing, meditating. Yes, I do. I meditated, in the Uber ride on the way here. I was running a little behind. So meditating, a little prayer, whatever, drinking water, just keeping yourself, I usually don't eat before. But that's me.
Okay. So when we met, you were my son's high school English teacher. And we became friends because his godmother was also in that department at View Park Prep. I regarded you somewhat as someone who was very shy, who sort of tiptoed carefully across South Los Angeles. And then I invited you to an open mic night, and you read from We Are Bridges, or what I believe was like an early from before you won the award. And I said, I don't know this woman at all. It was so hot, sexy, sensual. I was shocked. So I want you to do it again. Can you read for us the chapter Mary 1903?
Thank you, Malika.
Yeah, we were prepared differently. We left our books behind.
Yes.
Yeah. There it is.
Mary, 1903. Mary knows that the only way to hold on to a scent is to fold it into the crevices of your skin. First, you have to treat the skin from the inside out. Leola once taught her how to emit oil from flowers to pull out their deepest essences. She taught her how to pluck the best flower from a bush, how to run her fingers over its moist petals, and how to separate them from each other before reuniting them in a jar of pre-poured oil. Mary places her finger in the jar and watches the flower pieces roll into the tunnel her finger creates. She closes the jar with a lid and places it on a shelf to marinate for 2 weeks. The petals float. The oil listens. When the flower oil is ready, Mary readies her bath. She opens the jar, and the oil, having become one with the flower, springs forth its perfume. Mary sips a quarter of it. The scent will seep out of her pores later. She pours a small cup of it in her palm, inhales, and then lets it fall from her hand into the wash tub of water. She slips her body into the tub and opens her legs. She is thinking of Bert. This evening, she will meet him down by the river. They are not married yet, but Mary makes up her mind right then and there, sitting in the tub, that tonight will be their first time. She will not wait. They will not wait to become flour and oil merged. They are at the river. Bert's body is over Mary's body. He smells like grass and he smells like the earth, sweet, dark. Mary has tasted dirt and grass before, and so he tastes familiar. She is over him now. He places his hands on her hips, not to steer, but to hold on, and he wonders at the wild smell of her. It flows from her elbows, her neck, the roots of her hair, and all the places he cannot see. Mary knows it is better to give flowers to the living. The river grows black and still, swallowing the sound of every living thing, the cacophony of crickets, the whisper of water over moss, the moaning of man and woman. In a little while, the world will come for them, the white men with their guns and their pitchfork hearts, the law with its blind eye will come for them. But for now, all of those threats are held at bay as this Black woman and this Black man make love, make life with the river and the trees and the night covering them.
All right, so it's Black History Month, but Valentine's Day is also around the corner. So there you go, 2 for 1. So let's talk about the importance of play, because that was very playful, sexy, sensual, and playful. You write about heavy topics, or in this book at least, but in your writer's room, there are also toys and dolls. If you follow Cassandra on Instagram, you will see Barbies, and I was confused by that because I thought that you were a gender nonconforming parent and those were your son's Barbies, but they're yours and your husband's. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So how do you play during the writing process, and why is it important to engage in creative play?
I love that question. You know, for me, it's all about sensuality. In your city, Paris, I've fallen in love with. This is my first time here. I mean, I knew I would love Paris, but even though it's been such a short amount of time, just all the walking and taking in all of the senses, really using all of your senses. In my Los Angeles neighborhood, I try to take a walk every day. And so touching the tree bark, marveling over the different trees that I haven't noticed before, you know, collecting leaves, the dogs, the cats, whatever things that are familiar, you can find the beauty and sensuality in those things. So I love touch, I love smell, I love taste. So to me, all of that is play, like daily play too. I use my camera a lot as my journal now because it's easy and convenient. And then later in my writing room, I can look at those photos and it might be a piece of a poem or it might weave its way into a story. There are parts of this book where didn't have anything to do with, you know, while I was writing or the story, but in my journal, I was able to weave, you know, seeing a squirrel. I saw a squirrel once at a cemetery. So even though I was at a cemetery and it was a very somber moment, there was this squirrel. It's just I saw his body just making these waves across the graves and up trees and across the grass. I just thought, wow, you know, there are so many people who are coming here to grieve a loved one. This animal, though, just reminded me of joy and play and movement and sensuality. And so those are daily pieces of my of play for me. And I think the dolls came during the beginning of the pandemic. I think that's when I've always loved dolls. And I used to have tons of dolls as a kid. But in my small Louisiana town, the only dolls that were available to us were white dolls. We didn't have access to dolls that were of color. And so I was so excited to see these Black Barbies now with natural hair, afros, braids. And so I bought the first one just because I thought it was super cool. And then I bought another one and I started buying little outfits, and we weren't going out with friends. So I started having them play with each other and go out to dinner and wear really amazing outfits. And now they have their own, I have a windowsill that comes out. So they have their own platform with furniture, and not Barbie furniture, but I found little pieces online like wooden carved furniture, coffee tables. I think Gemma asked me, their daughter asked me, where did you find, showed her some pictures, where did you find a coffee cup for them? So I have like all of the details. And for me, it's like staging a play when I see them. They're even, so now that they're on a windowsill, there's a curtain. So even that, the drawing of the curtains and the pulling back of the curtains just brings a smile to my face. You know, to play with them is a break from the writing. There's no pressure there in playing with them. I love playing with the bendable ones, the movable ones, because when you're writing and you're talking about, you want to talk about the way a character holds their head or their hands or their arms or their feet. And there's so many things. Instead of saying that the character is nervous or saying that the character is hesitant, how can you show that through the body movement? And so I'll play with the dolls and have them get into different movements or have their hands, you know, do something that I might try to describe later in the writing.
Yeah, all of these practices, your mindfulness, your awareness when you're walking, all those details and those textures that you pay attention to, the way that you are embodied, it really shows up in the writing. And she's a writer's writer. You know, I really appreciate all of that. You can feel it when you read the page or when you listen. You bring us into those moments. So thank you. So I think this is perfect. We have a few minutes and I have one last question, right? Yeah. So you talked about returning to your writing desk and longing to return to the writing desk after the this whole publicity tour you've been doing. What are you experimenting with next? I think you mentioned there are 3 things that you're toying around with. So what's next?
Yeah, I have to pick one. I have all of these journals. I've been a long time journal keeper, and I'll write in these beautiful journals that I get at the same time, which is ridiculous and crazy because then I don't know where I wrote what. So one of the things that I want to do when I get back home is kind of just condense everything and get it all together and pick one of the projects. I think the project that I'm leaning towards has to do with women's knowledge of the land. And that's inspired by my maternal grandmother, who used to be connected to the land and who had something in a medicine cabinet in the kitchen called snake root. But I never knew really what it did. And it was sort of just off in a corner of the medicine cabinet. It was in this amber, it was a bottle and it was amber liquid with this root that looked like a snake. So I asked my mother about it recently, and she told me what it was. And it was something that they would collect and use to treat different ailments. So I looked it up online, and sure enough, it's been used to treat many different ailments. And I'm just curious as to why, though, that kind of knowledge was pushed to the background. In particular, you know, in some of our Southern Black families, there's this divide between Christianity and spirituality, and that kind of spiritual knowledge of the land and of my grandmother also was an avid reader of Farmer's Almanac and the moon phases, and you know, knowing when to do what, when to plant what, cut hair, all of that. I'm just interested in getting back to a story that gets us back to that kind of natural knowledge. And I think there's such a hunger for it. And that hunger has grown as we're in the pandemic and as we're, the world is in such a mess. But I'm excited to see what urban farmers are doing in cities like mine in Los Angeles. I'm working on an article now for LA Parent Magazine about urban farmers who are bringing children in by giving, summer camps. And so the children get to go there, even children who haven't been around animals, milk goats and, see the chickens lay their egg, the hens lay their eggs. And they're so excited. One of the farmers was telling me that when the parents come to pick up their children, they have to kind of shoo the parents out because the parents want to stay. The parents need this connection to the land. So I think my character is doing something with farming or gardening or root digging.
Yeah. That's like one of my dreams, to have a goat farm. So yes, goats are amazing. Yeah, I sense that this is an era of retrieval, and that we are going back and collecting and pushing forward all of the things that were suppressed in our past. So I'm looking forward to Snake Root. Is that the title? We don't know
Snake
yet.
root women, maybe.
Snake Root women, yes. All right, so we're going to move. You're welcome. Thank you, Cassandra Lane, everyone.
Can we have a big round of applause, please, for both Cassandra and Malika? You're so well prepared. What brilliant questions. Do you have any questions in the room? Cassandra or Malika, for that matter? Two. Okay, we'll stop.
Hi, I'm French and I'm an English teacher, and I'm writing at the moment, and I'm very curious to know about how many manuscripts you sent before you had an answer, and was it long to get the answer? What were your expectations concerning that process before meeting the editor?
Great question. Good luck with your writing. And thank you so much for being here and for your question. I don't think I'm a great model because I have friends who have a system, they have a spreadsheet, and they're constantly sending out their work to agents and to publishers because it is hard. I feel like I lucked up to some degree, sending to those book contests, but with this next project, I'm definitely going to get more organized. We'll be sending the project out to many more agents and publishers. So I think, there's no magic number, but just when you feel like your project is ready, start sending it out. I mean, if you have setting a goal, a weekly goal or a monthly goal, I'm going to send this manuscript out to 5 agents this month, and then keeping track of who you sent it out through a spreadsheet or whatever system you embrace. Because I have so many friends who are writers, and there's so many different pathways to publishing. There's not just one. But I think I really admire the writers who continue to send their work out consistently. And I know that with the next project, I'll have to do that.
Thank you.
So Cassandra, I have a question. So the lynching of Burt Bridges is a pivotal point in your family's history. And had it not been for that lynching, maybe you would be a daughter of Mississippi versus a daughter of Louisiana. So your family fled, because of this, very gruesome event. And trauma to the Black body is a very important part of African-American history, particularly families from the South. And, oftentimes it's talked about in whispers, or sometimes there's shame, and sometimes it's something that families want to leave in the past. They moved to California, they moved to Chicago, oftentimes fleeing violence. How important do you feel that it is to talk about this history, acknowledge it, and learn from it to help families, I guess, heal from that trauma and not pass on the ills of that trauma to the next generation?
For me, it's very important. I know that that's my personal philosophy. Not everyone holds that philosophy, not even in my own family. But I think that along the lines of your generations, there's going to be someone who has questions. Not everyone is obsessed with that history. We were talking about that last night, or hears, the ghosts of ancestors, but someone does, and someone later, your children or your children's children, will have questions. And so for me, maybe as a journalist, as a writer, having some sort of archive, some sort of record is important. And then writing just happens to be the way that I express myself. And I don't think that it cancels out, because I know right now the whole trend is, let's embrace our joy. And I love that. Black boy joy and Black girl magic. I think we have all of that. And at the same time can explore generational trauma, intergenerational trauma, national trauma, the history of the world. They don't cancel each other out. I think they enrich each other. So I know my son has questions now. I think that sometimes families repeat patterns because they don't know what happened. And for example, in my own family, a pattern of incest can be traced back at least to great grandfather on my grandmother's side, but always was this hush hush culture around it. And so for me, telling my son this is something that has happened in the family. This is not how you treat women. This is not how you treat girls or boys or men or whatever. It's about respecting your body, their body, and boundaries. So bringing our personal stories, our personal family stories into the historic, into the moment, to the present, I think is important. Yeah.
Hello, my name is Evia. I'm a teacher and a creative who is still figuring out what medium works best for her. And my biggest struggle while creating has been decentering myself from anything that I do, because I always feel like I'm talking about myself and I always feel like it's invalidating anything that I try to do, because yeah, it always ends up being about me. And I would like to hear from someone who's been able to decenter themselves or just take a step back and create something that could speak to more people and that is inclusive. How are you able to get there?
So, I think our personal stories are political. The political is personal, the personal is political. If you don't feel comfortable speaking from the I or whatever you're working on, doing it from the first person, you can always do, interviews. You can always research to tell whatever you're obsessed with from the perspectives of other people. But the I is always there. You're seeing it from your perspective. It's your vision. So even if you never use the I, the first person, you're still in that story. You're still in that project. But those are just narrative and artistic choices that you have the right to make. For me, I didn't have a problem using first person. I'd spent 10 years working as a journalist and telling other people's stories. And so I wanted to hear my voice. I wanted to hear what I thought, and I wanted to see how that wove in with the rest of the community stories.
I want to know your story. I want you to center yourself. I want to see, hear, smell, taste, know everything there is to know. So I would say center yourself and share
Malika.
that with us, because that's what we want to know. Yeah.
And also, what is the hesitancy? Do you feel like that hesitancy is coming from you or from like the society, the outside of you? Where is that hesitancy coming from?
So I tried to psychoanalyze that the other day. I tried to be my therapist. And it could be hesitation because it means that when you center yourself, whatever critic comes to what you've done becomes very personal now. It becomes about you. And also it feels like you're given access. Like, just how much access am I willing to give to the listener? Just how open am I willing to be? So it's a question of vulnerability. Maybe that is what I should be working on. being comfortable with being vulnerable and not, I don't know, it's just, yeah, that's basically it.
Can you talk, because you get very vulnerable in this book, even things with like things you've told your, refused to tell your doctors in the past. And I'm like, I didn't even know you could lie to doctors. So can you talk about that vulnerability and I want to be clear that in We Are Bridges, she doesn't just point fingers at accusers. She points the finger at herself too, and is very open with the ways that she has been human in her life experience. So talk about vulnerability and looking at yourself and putting yourself out there.
Yeah, and again, I believe in agency, but so again, if you don't feel comfortable because you want to tell your stories in another way, that's great. And so that's a narrative artistic choice that you make. If it's because of fear of outside critics, that's something else to look at. And I think that, it's important to build some structures to support you. So for me, therapy is important. So having a therapist, working with therapists over the years, first, just to hear to hear myself and to have them hear me. And that's just part of self-nurturing and self-care. So therapy, I definitely promote that. And then a small trusted group of friends or writers or fellow writers, so that you're not, before you take your work out into the world, you've already kind of tested it with in these safe smaller groups. So I see it as layers upon layers upon layers before you bring it out into a wider public. And then if you do decide to bring a story that's somewhat personal out into a wider public, trying to find a way to release it. It won't be complete because yes, if it's part of you, you're in those pages. You've bled, you've sweated, you've cried, you're in those pages. But I think just for me, I think I needed to publish this book when I published it. I don't think I was supposed to publish this book earlier when I was not as mature about some certain things, maybe not as psychologically strong as I am now. But now I feel like the story doesn't belong to me, even though it's part of my story. It's not all of my story. I haven't given you all of me. You don't know all of who I am, but it's a part of a story that I chose to share. And now it's not my business. Now it's the reader's business. Now it's the reader's story and how they relate to that story. And there are lots of reviews, and I don't read any of the reviews now, like in terms of just readers, on Goodreads or Amazon or whatever. And they're positive ones out there. And I think at some point, when it first came out, I was looking, but I saw a writer on Twitter say, it's not my business what reviewers are saying about the book, whether it's positive or negative. My job is to work on the next project. My job is to do what I want to do with this book, teaching workshops, going into classrooms, being a guest speaker, working with my publicist. That's my job. And when I read that, I was like, that's so true. So there are some people who've told me that they wrote great reviews on Goodreads or Amazon or wherever, and I haven't read them because I just decided that I wouldn't read the reviews at all, because it's not personal anymore. I've done the work that I was supposed to do.
Yeah, please.
Do people reach out to you directly and with their experiences of the book? And if so, do you read and respond to those, or just read them? Or
Oh, personal, definitely. That's that's the reason why I wrote it, was to have that personal. It's such a relationship between the author and reader. So personal emails, messages to my website, DM messages. I love that. I'm talking about just going to a website and sitting there and reading, those kinds of reviews. No, I haven't done that in a while.
Yes.
Thank you for being here. I've enjoyed this a lot, but I really was looking forward to hearing you read from your book. I wanted to hear a passage that you feel is important that you convey to us. I want to be a part of that book in that respect. Not how you got to where you are, but what's there. Is that inappropriate? I don't know.
No, I don't know if you missed when I did read a passage.
No.
Were you here? Okay. Okay. Oh, I'm sorry.
There is an audio book. You don't have to apologize. There is an audio book and you can hear her read the whole book. It's available wherever audio books are sold.
A mysterious place. We have a great question on Zoom from Jennifer Janest, who writes, how did the imagined scenes with Mary/Bert come to you? Did you have a ritual, a thought, a prompt to bring you to that moment, or did they simply arrive?
Thank you, Jennifer. Thanks for being here. They first started coming to me in dreams. I first started I dreamed about Mary. I had a dream about my grandfather, Houston. And I would wake up, they were so rich, those dreams, and I would wake up and write them down. One that I can remember is where I talk about Mary and the moon. And again, I didn't know how they were going to fit into the book structurally. I've struggled with structure, but I just would get it down. So I would say first dreams. And then I wanted to continue to encourage those visual stories. So I started going to places that reminded me of, or not reminded me, but that just were reminiscent of that time period. At one point, I went to Mississippi, to the town where Bert was lynched, and walked around, collected different samples, pine cones and rocks. And so I just started kind of opening, since I felt like they wanted their stories told, I started opening myself to those stories more and more. I would go to cemeteries in Los Angeles and look for tombstones that were dated at the same time, around the same time Bert was lynched, 1904, and just try to imagine those people's lives. I looked at music that was created around that time, articles, just any and everything to help give more texture to these stories.